Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, and members of the community. I'm here tonight to give a short presentation. I'll try to keep this very short, on the special tax for fire and emergency medical services. And to begin with, I want to touch on something that Mayor Harris said in the State of the City address. He talked about the implementation of fire impact fees. And I want to thank the council, my own board of directors at the Twentynine Palms Water District, and city staff for that accomplishment. That's going to be very important for the fire department going forward to start acquiring those fees and putting them away for the future capital needs of the fire department. The one thing about those impact fees is they can only be used for new growth, a new fire station, expansion of an existing fire station, or a new piece of equipment, such as a ladder truck, that we didn't already have. What they can't be used for, and this is the importance of what I'm going to talk about tonight, they can't pay for the firefighters that are in the stations, they can't pay for the fuel, that goes in the trucks, and they can't pay for a fire engine that you're going to buy to replace one that's old. They can only, impact fees can only be used for new growth needs. So with that being said, if I could have the next slide. First I'd like to talk about this evening is the organization of the Twentynine Palms Fire Department. As some in the community may still not be aware, the fire department actually is governed by the Twentynine Palms Water District. And there's a board of directors that consists of 5 directors that are elected at large by residents of the district. The water district boundaries are the same as the fire district boundaries, and then we cover approximately 87 square miles. Occasionally you may see that number at 88. And within those 87 square miles, there's 55 square miles that belong to the city. We provide service from 2 fire stations, Station 421, which is located at 6560 Adobe Road. That is the only fire station that resides inside the city limits. And Station 422, which is located at 3834 Lear Avenue, and that station resides in the unincorporated area of the district, what we commonly call Desert Heights. As far as unincorporated areas of the district, the vast majority of that unincorporated area is that area known as Desert Heights. There is a very small area at the northeast corner of the district that also exists outside the city boundaries, basically north of Valley Vista. And the department responds to over 2,400 incidents per year, and it looks like this year we're probably going to break 2,500 incidents for the year. That is coming very close to approximately 7 calls per day. Next slide, please. This is a photo from our 50th anniversary. The department celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2008. And all the individuals you see there, some of the faces have changed, but in essence, this is what your fire department looks like today as far as numbers and composition. Besides myself, career staff, we have 6 company officers. That is your paid staff. And touch briefly on those company officers. Most municipal departments, your paid staff, suppression personnel, work 56-hour work weeks. These company officers work a 72-hour work week. That's how many hours out of a week that they are here living in a fire station and not home with their families. About the only departments that you see working 72-hour work weeks, other than our department, the federal fire department on the base, they work 72-hour work weeks, and the state firefighters known as CAL FIRE also are still working 72-hour work weeks. We have a part-time paid administrative assistant. She tries to keep me organized. We have a volunteer chaplain who has served the department as long as I have. Him and I started together. And we have approximately 30 reserve firefighters. These are volunteers. And I want to take a couple minutes to talk about them because they are, in essence, the real backbone of this fire department. Out of that core of 30 reserve firefighters, we have 4 of those on each day. These reserve firefighters, the vast majority of them do not live in this community. They are young men and occasionally women who are trying to gain a career in the fire service. They have put themselves through a fire academy at one of the community colleges somewhere in Southern California. They drive up to 29 Palms 1 day a week, stand a 24-hour shift, providing protection to this community, and for that, we reimburse them gas money. We have firefighters that come from as far away as Huntington Beach. We have firefighters that, I have one firefighter right now that is coming out of Ventura County and driving the 29 Palms. And a lot of these firefighters then go on to gain a career position somewhere else. So we have, besides the, we have a tremendous cost savings by the use of these reserve firefighters. What we also have is we spend a whole lot of time conducting training, because these are basic firefighters that have just come out of academies. Next slide, please. So out of all these people that you saw in that picture, that provides us with daily staffing of 7 suppression personnel. We have a duty officer that is either myself or one of the 2 captains, and at each station we have a 3-person engine company. We have a career company officer on that engine, and that career company officer leads the 2 reserve firefighters that are on that engine. And that is our daily staffing. Next slide, please. When we talk about the daily staffing, 2 engine companies can handle 2 medical aids at once. One of those engines could be out of medical aid, and the other one could be out of minor traffic accident. If you start getting into a major traffic accident where you have multiple patients, or you have a traffic accident which requires extrication, it's going to require both those engine companies and the duty officer to be there. But what we really focus on, and communities typically build their staffing around, is what does it take to handle a significant fire event? And most common thing that we look for in a community such as ours is a single family residence fire. The national standard, as you can see by that listing, says that there should be 14 firefighters on the fire ground to fight a fire in a single family residence. In 29 Palms, we only have daily staffing of 7. The 29 Palms Marine Base, as Mayor Harris spoke to earlier, provides us with what we call automatic aid. Anytime we are toned for a structure fire, the base fire department is toned at the same time. And they respond with either a 4-person engine company or a 4-person truck company. With 29 or with the Marine Base, that gives us a total of 11 personnel on a fire ground. We're still coming up short of the national standard. We wind up doing more work. Next slide, please. The diamonds may be a little hard to see for the members in the audience, but the other thing that you need to look at when it comes to community fire protection is community insurance rating. You know, a number of years ago, if you had a home and the insurance company wanted to give you a quote on what your property owner's insurance was going to be, they would ask, do you have a fire station within 5 miles of your home? They've changed that question. Do you have a 24-hour staffed fire station within 5 miles of your home? And do you have a fire hydrant within 1,000 feet of that home? If you can answer yes to both those questions, in this community, you'll get a Class 4 rating and pretty good insurance rate. If you cannot answer both those questions in the positive, more than likely, depending on your insurance company, they will deem your property as what we call a Class 9, and you'll see a significant increase in your insurance premium. Next slide, please. One of the things we've done is we've gone out and checked with some insurance agencies, and these are 4 examples of properties located, 3 of them within the city and 1 of them in the Desert Heights area, that show the difference in insurance premium between a Class 4 rating and a Class 9 rating. This just shows some of the financial impact if you don't have a sufficient level of fire service being provided in your community as determined by the Insurance Services Office. Next slide, please. With that background, I'd like to talk about the fire department funding. Over 95% of the fire department funding comes from a voter-approved special tax. Many times in this community we hear, well, why don't the water district help the fire department? By law, water revenues are considered fees, and under Prop 218, fees can only be used what they are designated for. So your water charge, your ready-to-serve charge that you see on your water bill, those are fees that support directly the water district operations and cannot be used for fire department operations. Take that a step farther, on your tax bill, you see your water availability assessment. Once again, that is to support the infrastructure of the water district and their operations and cannot be used to support fire department operations. This fire department does not receive any portion of the 1% ad valorem property tax. If you look across communities in California, depending on what community you get in, it all depends. Every community is different as to how fire departments are funded. We're the worst case scenario. We receive no portion of the ad valorem property tax. You go to the other end of the basin, and in Yucca Valley, 22% of the ad valorem property tax goes directly to fire protection. City of Hesperia, they see 15% go. Apple Valley Fire District gets approximately 12%. It's spread all across the board, and this is all a result, after effect of the passage of Prop 13 back in the late 70s, and in effect, at that time, there was no property tax in place in this community to support fire protection, and therefore, we got frozen out of that 1% ad valorem property tax. Nor does the fire department receive any portion of sales tax or occupancy tax, transient occupancy tax. Obviously, those are taxes that is generated for the city and can be used for various general fund purposes. With the fire department existing as a portion of the water district outside a city or a county governance, we receive no portion of either one of those. Next slide, please. To talk about how the fire department is funded history-wise, the first, to use a better term, tax that was in place to support the fire department was implemented in 1985. Prior to 1985, the fire department was operating on a, for better term, catch as catch can, and at that time they were actually funding the fire department out of water revenues. Obviously, as I mentioned previously, that is not allowed, and for various reasons, what finally got implemented in 1985 was what was known as a benefit assessment. That benefit assessment, in essence, the way that process worked was the board each year determined the financial needs, and they determined whether for a single year, it could be for a 2-year period or 3-year period or even longer, but they determined the financial needs, and they sent notice out to the property owners saying, we're going to set a benefit assessment rate of X dollar amount for this year or for the next 2 years. If they received less than a certain percentage of protest back from those property owners during a public hearing, at that point they could proceed, vote on the implementation of that benefit assessment, and fund the fire department. If you look at those figures, and this is something I'd like everyone to keep in mind, in that first year, the amount was $33.85. It went up incrementally across those years to where in 1994, 10 years later, it was $57. Across that 10 years, that's a 68% increase. Something to keep in mind as I continue through this. As a result of the passage by the statewide Proposition 218, the district was forced to get away from this benefit assessment and go out to the voters to approve a special tax to continue funding the fire department. That was put on the ballot in June of 1997 and was approved by the voters. It was set at $54, and the other element that it had no inflation adjuster. At the time, it was estimated to be adequate for 5 years, and at that time, we were only staffing 1 station. We actually managed to make that tax work all the way through until the next measure was approved in March 2005. So that tax at $54 flat with no inflation adjuster went for 8 years. And in 2 of those years, we had the Lear Avenue station staffed 24 hours a day. Measure J was approved in March 2005, and it increased the dollar amount from $54 to $80. But once again, it had no inflation adjuster. And within that ballot language, what we said was that this tax would be estimated to be adequate for 8 years and to provide staffing at 2 fire stations. We've lived up to our promise. We are now coming up on the end of the 7th year. But this last year or so is going to be very rough. Next slide, please. This is a financial history and projection of what the fire department has done and what it is facing in its current fiscal year and the next fiscal year. Revenues are in green, expenditures are in red, and the most important element to really be looking at is that bell curve of the fund balance. One thing about the fire department, because the only thing we're receiving is property tax revenue, which is collected by the county starting in November, and basically we do not see the first payments from the county until early December, we have to have a fund balance at the end of a fiscal year that will carry us into the next fiscal year of approximately 42% of that fiscal year's operating expenditures. So fund balance at the end of a fiscal year is very important to carry us into the next fiscal year. Couple of oddities that you may be wondering about in that graph. In that second year, the first year shows the last year of the $54 tax. Fiscal 05-06 shows the first year of the $80 tax, and reasons revenue and expenditures are both high in that year. On the revenue side, we had close to $150,000 grant revenue. That was for self-contained breathing apparatus. And additionally, in that particular year, there were a number of people that got current on their property taxes. So we saw a substantial increase in fines and penalties that were brought in that fiscal year. As far as on the expenditure side, there was 2 things. We expended the revenue from the grant for the self-contained breathing apparatus, and in that fiscal year also was the expenditure for a new replacement fire engine. And that would be the newest engine in the fleet, which is currently out at the Lear Avenue Station. What is very critical, if you look at those last 2 years, and as you can see, expenditures are projected to be going up. Revenue is flat to maybe a little bit of an increase, but what is occurring is by the end of fiscal 2012, 2013, if we don't know that we have a increased amount of revenue with that type of fund balance, we are going to have to pull ourselves back to the point of having a balanced budget. And the only way to basically describe getting back to a balanced budget, think back to that photograph that you saw of the department personnel, tear it in half. Could I have the next slide, please? If you're wondering what is it costing to provide fire protection in 29 Palms as compared to some other communities, here's a couple samples of some other desert communities. City of Atalanta, they contract with San Bernardino County Fire Department. They have 2 stations. Each station has 3 personnel on it. They share a battalion chief with a surrounding unincorporated area. For that privilege, they pay $3.1 million. So their per capita cost is almost $100 per person. Apple Valley Fire District is an independent fire district that covers approximately 120 square miles. That's the entire town of Apple Valley and a whole lot of unincorporated area. They have approximately 6 fire stations, 70,000 people. Their budget, $7.4 million. As you can see, that per capita cost is up over $100 a person. City of Barstow used to be an independent fire district. City of Barstow Fire is now a subsidiary district of the city. That occurred just recently within the last year. Their population is not much more than ours, but of course, one thing you got to keep in mind is the interstates that run through the city of Barstow. Their budget, $3.8 million. As you can see, they pay almost $170 per person for fire protection. 29 Palms, our population, and that population number comes from the impact fee study. Lots of times you see the 29 Palms population as stated as well over 25,000. What you need to subtract out is the personnel that reside aboard the Marine base. but a 20,000 population, a recurring operating budget approximately $1.4 million, less than $70 a person for fire protection in 29 Palms. Next slide, please. For the last approximate 6 months, the Water District has been working on what are we going to do 2013 and beyond. And this has resulted in proposed ordinance 94. And first thing I want to point out is holding our promise to the voters. This tax measure, if approved, if passed, will not take effect until July 1st, 2013. What it's proposing is a 50% increase from the $80 to $120. And if you look back at the increase from $54 to $80, that was almost a 50% increase. Additionally, what is proposed in this, if you saw that bell curve, we want to try to get away from that bell curve effect of fund balance, is a 4% annual inflation adjuster for 10 years. And just recently, having held a couple of public hearings already, there might be a slight change to that the board wants to consider at the final public hearing, and that came from public input, was that a little hard sometimes for community members to wrap their hands around what does 4% translate across each year, because obviously you have a compounding effect across 10 years. And the suggestion was, well, instead of saying 4% increase per year, how about a flat $6 increase per year across 10 years? If this ordinance is approved by the voters, once passed by the board, it will maintain the current level of service at the 2 stations. Additionally, if you look back at that national standard and what we do when it comes to fire department response to structure fires, what we're looking to do by the year 2017 is add a 2-person patrol to the downtown station. A couple of things that does. It will also provide us cross-staffing to the truck, which the city assisted the fire department in purchasing. The other thing, by having a second unit at the downtown station, and to touch briefly on this, within a 2-mile radius of the downtown station, 60% of our calls occur. By the time you get out to the 3-mile radius from that downtown station, we see 84% of our calls. So we have a lot of back-to-back calls, and a lot of those calls are medical aid calls. When you only have 1 unit in that station, they have to be on a type of apparatus where they can handle any type of call, because they could be out on the road finishing 1 call when they get called to a structure fire. With that large volume of calls occurring within the downtown station, if we, in the future, are able to get staffing on a 2-person patrol, that smaller unit would be the first out unit that will handle a vast majority of these medical aid calls that we go to on a daily basis. This plan is going to continue to provide a combination of career and volunteer staff. One of the options that was looked at, the question was raised, well, you currently have 7 people on duty. What would it take to have a fully career department providing 7 people on duty each day? And the calculation came out to be a 110% increase with 4% annually thereafter. It would mean the current tax would jump from $80 to $168 to provide full-time career staffing across the board. That would probably take the budget from the current $1.4 million to approximately $2.5 million. Next slide, please. Questions of what is going to occur if we do not see a tax increase by 2013. As I said, a drastic reduction in current service level. Going back to that photo once again of our department personnel, take that photo and tear it in half. Another way I'd like to try to compare this is, imagine if the city was painted into the same very small box in trying to generate revenue to provide for your law enforcement contract. And faced with the same situation that you had to make the decision that you were going to go from having 2 deputies on the street to only having 1 deputy on this street 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that his backup was going to, his closest backup was going to be somewhere on the Marine base, somewhere in Joshua Tree, or somewhere in Wonder Valley. Food for thought. That reduction in service level will lead to what we term as inadequate response times to emergency calls, and obviously, without the ability to provide that coverage within the fire station, you have the potential for increased insurance rates. Typically, the first ones that will see them will be the homeowners, and then it'll carry over to the commercial properties. Next slide, please. As it stands right now, the final public hearing on the proposed Ordinance 94 is scheduled to be held Wednesday, December 21st at 6 p.m. at Water District Headquarters, and that is over on Hatch Road. And one of the reasons I'm standing here tonight, we have had very little public turnout for the first two public hearings. I'm using every avenue that I can to encourage the public to please attend the board meeting, make your thoughts heard on what is being proposed, so you can assist the Twentynine Palms Water District Board of Directors on their decision and how to proceed with funding the fire department in the future. Next slide, please. Whoop. Thank you. To summarize what is going on currently, to implement the proposed Ordinance 94, the first step would be a ordinance being approved by the Board of Directors of the Water District. At the time that the directors approve that ordinance, that will then cause it to go to a ballot measure. And the desire of the board has already been decided on that regard, is that they want to stay away from the June primary election and everything that's going to be on that ballot. And so the board's decision, if they approve the ordinance, it will become a special mail ballot election, with the date of the election being April 17th in 2012. And what that means is registered voters would start seeing their ballots in the mailbox approximately 4 weeks prior to that date. And all ballots that are going to be turned in would have to be back to the registrar by April 17th. It requires 2/3 voter approval of those that vote in election to approve this ordinance. And finally, if we receive that 2/3 voter approval, once again, this will not become effective until July 1st, 2013. Well, one of the reasons we're turning to the voters in 2012, in essence, we're coming out a year early to ask the question, because we need to know, we need to start preparing for the adverse effect if this ordinance is not passed. And with that, thank you for the time.
What's the date again for that meeting, Jim?
Wednesday, December 21st at 6 p.m. at Water District Headquarters.
Thank you.